Good afternoon, and welcome to Expose Yourself to Art, a show in which we plumb the depths of the creative process by inviting artists to come and talk with us about their lives and their art. And as usual, I'm joined in this endeavor by my co-host, Linda Scheller. Come on in, Linda. How are you today?
Fine, thanks. Good to see you, David.
Yeah. Hey, we've always spent a few moments at the start of these shows getting to know each other and plumbing the depths of our own creativity. And I have something I want you to react to today. So, Linda, behind the scenes, could you bring this up? Our little picture. Hey.
Oh, yes.
Recognize that?
I sure do. That is beautiful. That's Bill Harris's photograph.
Yes, and
it's the cover of Collision 6, and he and I were paired in the last Collision. Could you tell us about the beginning of the Collision collaboration?
Sure. For those of you who might not be familiar with this, the Collision shows were started a number of years ago, 2008, 9, something like that, when I was running a small photo gallery down the street and looking for things that would bring people in. Someone suggested I speak with Sam Piersdorf, then the poet laureate of Modesto, and they said, why don't you guys get together and create something that might appeal to the public? So we got together and decided to do this program in which we paired photographers with poets and challenged them to come up with unified works of art consisting of pictures and words. And it turned out to be a huge success. It was one of the big surprises for me culturally in this town. I was looking to bring a few more people into the gallery, and we did the Collision show, and the day that the poets did their reading with pictures like this projected behind them, we had standing room only in the gallery. And we've done it, 6 times now, and every time it's been the same thing. Modesto is a center for poetry. It's amazing. So you said you worked with Bill on this. This is obviously the cover of the book, but you also wrote a poem to go with it. So do you remember the poem? Can you share that?
Well, I just happen to have the book here.
Okay.
So
let's hear it.
Okay. So this is Canal Dancer. Here in the middle of a long valley, Modesto rears up and paws the air with the blast of a midtown train, tosses its mane of factory steam. Here we hold the dream world close. An almond orchard can be a forest when a forest is needed. A cityscape can be an angular range of mountains. Here, beauty is what we make of life. We draw in the kitchen, write in bed, sing behind the steering wheel, strum an old guitar on the back porch steps. Here, the sky speaks to us in clouds, and the earth below the pavement hums. The sun paints the edge of another day, while above the canal, a man dances.
Thank you. Listening to you and seeing the pictures, maybe we should do a show about the Collision program one of these days. So that's in the future. Today, let's get on to our guest, Dr. David Chapman. Let me just read a little bit of his formal bio here. It's really impressive. Dr. David Chapman is the current department chair at CSUS for the music department. He is Ecuadorian by birth and a Fulbright scholar. He is in worldwide demand for lectures, demonstrations, and concerts on the classical, flamenco guitar, and lute. His career has taken him to the stages in Russia, China, Japan, Thailand, South Korea, France, England, Germany, Italy, Ecuador, Argentina, and Mexico, as well as extensively throughout the United States. That's a heck of a resume, man. Let's get him in here and talk about all this stuff. This is going to be great. Come on in, David.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Amazing, So to start off, I realize this position for you at CSUS is new this year, and you stepped into it at the time of the pandemic, and you have been running around trying to make it all work. Let's start there. Why don't you tell us what that's been like for you?
Oh boy. Well, it has taken a village, just to be very frank. Let me just start by a slight correction. I hear a little bit of echo somewhere in there. So let me start with a slight correction. It's not CSUS, because that would be CSU Sacramento. We're talking about CSU Stanislaus in our county down in Turlock. And as the pandemic hit, we were all watching what was going on in Wuhan, China. I have friends in actually Wuhan that I've been corresponding with as this happened, end of the year before, the 2018, end of 2019 and beginning of 2020. And they told me it's really crazy. They're shutting everything down. Then one of our instructors, Dr. Joseph Wiggett, came to my office. I just gotten started being chair, learning the ropes of the program. And he told me, I have a friend in the U.S. Army that is a virologist. And he said, if we don't shut everything down, we're going to be in a world of pain. And so I moved immediately. I asked all of my faculty members in music to do whatever they could to go online, immediately go online, just listening to this, very drastic advice, which I took to heart. And we were one of the very first programs at CSU Stanislaus, CSU Stan, to go online. And eventually, when the university came in and told us you need to be fully online, we just took all the other classes and we moved everything online. And it has been quite a bit of an endeavor to stay afloat with our classes, giving our students what they need, what they're paying for, and doing it online in virtual settings, which means that we've purchased extreme amounts of software to reach all of our students. We've used care packages from the federal government to actually buy students instruments so that the students could actually take the instruments home. We also have computers and microphones that we've been able to check out to our students and faculty so that online instruction can keep on going.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm glad you were there and ready to adapt.
That's very kind of you. But also, I do have to say, I need to thank my dean, Jim Tuedio, who actually was instrumental in getting us the resources for acquiring everything that we got. It's like I said before, it took a village. Every single one of the instructors has been behind this 100%.
Yeah. Well, let's go way back. And what in your childhood influenced you and set you on this path?
I'm assuming you mean to becoming a musician, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. My dad was a guitarist. Unfortunately, he passed. And the reason why I was born and raised in South America with a name like David Chapman is that I actually am the son of an American who actually was born in Reedley, not too far away from where we're at. He went on the Peace Corps down to Ecuador, South America, and he fell in love with the country. And then, of course, he fell in love with my mom. And so my sister and I were born and raised in Ecuador. And so at an early age, I just was extremely impressed by the amplifier that my dad would actually pull out every Sunday. He would pull out his amp, pull out his guitar, plug it in. It was a whole production, and he was very meticulous about it. And I thought that the knobs on that amp were the coolest thing in the world. So I would just run at it. And this is not something I remember. This is something he would tell me. I would run at those knobs and start moving them up and down while he was playing. And so he decided to get me a little guitar. So every Sunday he would come out, pull out his guitar. I would pull out my little guitar. And one day he noticed that I was actually copying what he was doing.
Oh.
And he stopped playing. He heard me play and he said, "Oh, we need to get you lessons." And so he took me to the conservatory in Guayaquil. And I was privileged to start studying at an early age with this amazing Japanese instructor, Ryuhei Kobayashi, who did his studies in Spain and whom I actually studied under for about 15 years, give or take. And he was amazing, incredible. He played the 8-string guitar, and I just dove straight into the guitar. You would just be unable to pull me away from the instrument. The school bus would bring me home. I would just run to the guitar. I had a happy guitar childhood.
How nice.
Yeah.
So what was your own education like then?
Okay, so the conservatory in Ecuador, that education was together with the schooling that I had. It gives you a high school diploma. So I actually have a parallel high school diploma. I went to regular high school, and then at night I would go to the conservatory. So then I came to the U.S. When it was time for me to go to college, and I came to Sacramento, staying with my aunt and cousin, as well as my dad. And we began there. My mom and sister came later. I went to CSU Sacramento, met a great teacher, Richard Savino there, who's still there, and he's about to retire. And through his connections, I met some of the most amazing guitar players in the world. And I got to take master classes with people like Nigel North and the lute. And it's there where I actually got this fascination for the lute. When I came to the US, if I can backtrack, I played in a lot of South American groups that played folk music from South America. And when I came to the US, of course, that was gone. But one thing that I found in Sacramento was a fairly good sized flamenco guitar society. And I found that music spoke to me very well. So I started studying with Juan Serrano in Fresno. I kept on studying lute and guitar with Richard Savino. And then I had some lessons with people in the Bay Area. Whenever somebody of repute would come to the Bay Area to give concerts, I would immediately try to get lessons. And that pushed me to apply to get a Fulbright scholarship. And in the year 1993, I went through Europe kind of with a backpacking guitar, auditioning every single school. And I fell in love with this amazing school in Cologne in Germany. And I studied eventually under a Fulbright scholarship with Hubert Keppel in the Musikhochschule in Köln, which is the high school of learning, the conservatory. And did about 2.5 years there, got my European master's degree, and then came back over to the States to find out that my master's in Europe is not accredited here. So I had to get, so I have 2 masters in guitar. So I got a master's from the Conservatory of Music in San Francisco. And from there, that was quite a fun experience. Amazing. I studied with David Tannenbaum, Dusan Bogdanovich, Mark Teichels, amazing guitar players. And then I went to Texas, to Austin, to study with Adam Holtzman. He's got an amazing guitar studio. If you remember, Austin is the live music capital of the world. And they've got a just thrilling guitar society, perhaps the largest guitar society in the world. And I was able to, from Austin, apply for a fellowship to study and teach under the direction of Oscar Ghiglia, this amazing Italian guitar virtuoso. So I did part of my doctoral in Italy. And then I came to the Central Valley, a position open at the Modesto Junior College, and I was there for 18 years up until recently, where I made the move to Stan State. In a nutshell, that's my story.
How do you manage an artistic career and also the responsibilities of being the chair of the music department at Stanislaus?
Saying that I manage them is perhaps an overstatement, but I do the best I can. It is difficult. And particularly now that we're in a pandemic. This summer only, I was supposed to have played in Russia, China, Thailand, Czech Republic, and some other places, also in Latin America, and everything got canceled. Portugal as well. But everything got canceled. So we, now it's very easy to manage just the part of not being an artist of playing concerts, right? So I'm not doing it unless it's virtual events like the one that we're having right now, and I am eternally grateful for that. Giving the arts a home, music particularly. And so I have set my schedule so that I do all of my chair work in the morning. So up until noon, I just start at 9 and I go all the way until noon, and I try to do all of my committee work, all of the paperwork, approval of this and that, all the busy stuff that happens in helping manage a school of music. And I do have to say that the faculty have been just tremendous. We have Monday meetings, and we have lively discussions as to what we want to do with the music departments, how we want to best serve our students. And those are just extremely helpful. At 1 o'clock after lunch, I actually start teaching. I have a very large guitar studio. I think I have about 11 students. I go from Tuesday through pretty much Friday, all the way from 1 till about 5 p.m. And that's my work day. As soon as I hit my end of my work day, I have dinner and I grab the instruments and I just practice until the night. So that's how I manage it.
Well, I enjoy listening to you. It's great stories, but I understand that you brought a lot of instruments with you today.
Correct.
With you, as though we're in the studio. You have them there with you in your home. So, yeah.
So
let's hear what you've got a lot to tell us about these instruments.
I do, and it's really a fascinating story that I've prepared for you. So we begin with the lute, right? The lute came to Europe through the Middle East. The word lute is in fact a mispronunciation of al-ud, which means the wood. Ud means wood. And that's the instrument that you hear even today in Middle Eastern music, which is just fascinating. And it has no frets. It's more of a linear music instrument, and it's got a gorgeous, very deep, I would say melancholic sound. Now, the Europeans were enamored. We're talking about, the year 400 when the Saracens were in Spain. About 800, give or take, the instrument remained in Spain. But it's not until the 1450s that you actually have this transition to have polyphony, right? It really starts in the year 1000. But by 1400s, you have a couple of things. Spain is in control of the rest of the world, or most of the world as we knew it back then, Western world. And the music had an influence of both European and Moorish, because that was the music that they got accustomed to. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my lute and just show it and think a little bit just to show the character of it. But just before I play it, just to let you know, whereas the oud, the Middle Eastern oud, has this very melancholic sound to it, the lute, in a way, has a very happy sound. Let me show. So they used to be originally made of a gourd. Eventually, they actually made ribs that they just put together. Just making a lute is quite an endeavor. It's very, very difficult. This holds all of these ribs together, right? Usually, you wear a strap, so this also helps fortify the whole construction. A really famous lute maker in the UK said that a lute is built to the brink of disaster because it's almost always about to fall apart. Now, a lot of people ask me about the bent back aspect of the neck. There are so many reasons that people explain. Many people say that they used to play them in consorts. So you had a lot of lute players right next to each other around a campfire and playing for their lord. And so in order to fit more lute players together, because the lute is a quiet instrument, they would actually bend back the neck. not a very believable story. Another one is to actually kind of spread the tension of all of the strings and not have it extended, kind of like in a guitar, because there are so many strings. If you think about it, this is a late Renaissance lute, right? So they would actually, I call it a Renaissance lute, not because it was the instrument of the Renaissance. This instrument, because of its tuning, is called a Renaissance lute. But the music that, in fact, I'm going to be playing comes from the Baroque period, right? So 1450 is when we start looking at the Renaissance. And you have great musicians that came up around that time. But by the Baroque period, this instrument, that's more of a Renaissance sound to it. And I'll show you a little bit of that on the vihuela. But this instrument kind of evolved in the Baroque period. And this is Alessandro Piccinini, who was one of the developers of opera as we know it. And I'm not talking about opera Winfrey, I'm talking about opera, the music, musica, drama per musica. Now, one thing that I want to share is each instrument has its own approach. And in music, we call that a technique. But the technique to play the lute and the guitar on the left hand is almost exactly the same. On the right hand, however, things are very different, right? So lute players, for the most part, play without nails. But, we have to deal with the fact that I'm a guitar player first and lute player second. So I do have to keep my nails. So I've trained myself in my studies to actually turn my hand in like this, to just use the flesh. Because if I were to try to play the lute with a guitar technique, we'll get a very nasal sound because of the nails, right? So I try to, right? And also lute players tend to put their pinky on the top of the instrument, right? So if I bring the instrument up, maybe in a close up to the camera, you can see that this area of the instrument is always a little bit darker because the finger is always on top there. And that's just part of the lute technique. So that's the lute.
Fascinating. It's a beautiful instrument.
Thank you.
And you're right, and beautiful sound.
Very haunting. So in Spain, when the Spaniards basically expelled the Saracens, they regained control of most of the Iberian Peninsula, and they were in control of the New World, basically us. They just wanted to have their own identity. They had been with this instrument for almost 800 years, right? So all of their music was composed in an instrument like this one, but they wanted to have something different. So they came up with an instrument that looks completely different, but was tuned exactly the same, right? It doesn't sound exactly the same because it doesn't have this vault-like back and sides. But the vihuela from Spain had the same tuning, so they could keep the same melodies, the same musical traditions, but it was an instrument that looked completely different. So let me show you the vihuela española.
Fascinating.
Thank you. So this is a vihuela, which, as you can tell, has a flat back, much cheaper instrument to make. So if you are thinking of playing Renaissance repertoire and you don't want to drop thousands of dollars on a lute, I would say look into getting a vihuela. Sounds great, a lot cheaper, and it has the same tuning. this is the Vihuela Española, and it's got.
We're gonna clap for this.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of divisions. I don't know if at some point you noticed that I was using my thumb a lot for divided notes. And this is a technique that has been somewhat lost in the classical guitar period. Nowadays, guitar players don't play with thumb index, but lute players, they always play with thumb index. In fact, that is just the way that you should be playing this type of music, because the notes, the scales go pretty quickly. And they were doing scales not to really show off, but they were doing them to imitate a choir. Take, for example, this piece. This was originally a piece by Josquin de Prez in the 1400s. It's called 1,000 Regrets, and it was written for choir, and it was transcribed by Valderrábano, a great lute player. The transcription was so fantastic that the Emperor of Spain fell in love with it, and he called it La Canción del Emperador, the Emperor's Song. It does go on, but I have so many instruments to show you today. So that's the Spanish vihuela. Now, at the time in which we are looking in history at the development of these instruments, you notice that they're very quiet. And there was this thing in the 1600s that started changing the world permanently. The world of music was affected by Claudio Monteverdi and this new form of music that it was called drama per musica, a dramatic work set to music. And so Monteverdi devised this plot with a librettist, and giving you images of things that are happening in society. They started with deities and gods, and eventually, by the time of Mozart, it just became many satires. But this was opera, and the word opera in Italian basically means work. So what are you working on? Everybody and their grandmother was writing operas during this time period, writing drama per musica. But because drama per musica is such a long term for it, everybody just said, well, what is your work? What are you working? And the word opera, the word work, just stuck. And we call it today opera. And the demands of for the instrumentalists to play in operas and accompany the singers were such that larger instruments needed to be developed, right? So at this point, you had this new form of guitar called the Baroque guitar. And the Baroque guitar has less sets of strings. It has 5 courses, which means 5 sets of either single or double strings. This one has 6 courses, right? So it's single for the first and double for all the other ones. But the Baroque guitar has 5 courses, and it's in many ways a strumming instrument. There were some great virtuosi that wrote solo music for it. But in many ways, this is the direct ancestor of our concert guitar today. So this is a Baroque guitar. Now, if you look inside there, I know artists are going to get quite a treat with that one. That takes forever to make, that sound hole. There was one of my daughters looked at this and said, "Is this where the fairies live?" It's really an amazing, intricate work. And it's a much louder instrument.
Okay. It is beautiful.
And I believe that I played this very instrument in the concert that we did last time, where we did the Spanish music concert. works well for strumming. And if we bear in mind, this is the time in Europe in which they were looking for more volume out of the instruments, right? But the Baroque guitar did not quite cut it in a lot of settings. It can be very loud, but this works on the teeny side, right? You want to have kind of like an higher, happy sounding accompaniment. I mean, you could try to play sad stuff, but most of the repertoire that I find in this instrument, it's very peppy. Then you actually have the theorbo, and that's quite an instrument. See, the lute was not gone by the time of the Baroque guitar. They were adding strings or courses to the lute. And they realized that if they, let's see if I can give you an effect here. So here is this type of lute. That's the bottom of it. And you could think about it as the Energizer Bunny lute, because that's the neck. And now we start with the extended bass neck. And there you go. So in order to tune this instrument, I actually have to be standing up. So I checked on its tuning earlier before we started today. So I truly hope that it stayed in tune. Otherwise, I'm just going to show it to you and put it away because it's going to take a while. Of course, when I'm sitting down, I can only access this tuning pegs, right? But not really the high register. And this is an instrument that was used. There is solo repertoire written for it, but when I use it mainly to play chords and accompany early music, you know. And oh, sorry, this microphone is blocking your view.
How many strings does that have?
So this one has basically 14 sets of strings. These are all single, right? Right, and those are just your fretted strings, right? And then you start with your basically your extended bass strings. They are supposed to be tuned in a scale, and they basically went out a little bit. Right? And this instrument is tuned very similarly to a guitar. And in fact, this is where I believe the tuning of the guitar came to be. The Baroque guitar also follows the same idea. You have an extra high string that reminds you of an A lute, the tuning of the lute. It's an octave lower, so that when you are playing, you do not get in the register of the singer. So you don't want to kind of break that octave and interrupt the melodic virtuosity of the singer. So it's a re-entrant tuning so that it is lower. But if you tend to ignore the first string, if you're a guitar player trying to get into theorbo, you would ignore the first string because it's an A. And then you would think of the second string as your first string for the guitar, except that it is also an octave lower than a guitar, right? So outside of that, it's just about a guitar. The sixth string is not an E, it's a G. But outside of that, you are good to go. So when I accompany singers, early music groups, this is my go-to instrument. And I had a wonderful time with Dr. Daniel Alfonso's chamber singers. We did a Bach work and a beautiful composition. And I think that we still have a record of it. People can go to the university and see this footage of me playing with the theorbo. So that's the theorbo. And now we go on to, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
No, that's okay. I was just sitting here amazed at the size of this instrument. And how do you play it in a company with other people without doing grave damage to the people sitting next to you? That's
I notice that people are nice to me when I'm holding this thing.
okay.
Yeah, you want to have something larger than my music room, definitely. That's why this was a production, getting all of these instruments into this room, ready for our conversation today. And then we have the guitar, right? So we're moving in time. The theorbo was pretty much around until the 1700s. And so was the Baroque lute. That's another instrument that I just did not bring in today. It's actually in my living room, but I just figured that this would give you an idea. So then comes what we think of as the classical guitar. Today we call this type of instrument a parlor guitar or the romantic guitar. This is an instrument that was made in the 1830s. This instrument actually is an antique. This was made in the 1830s. I don't know who made it. We lost the label. But this part is, and this is terrible. I had no control of it. I was not even born. But this is actually ivory. So I can tell that this was made for somebody that was in the know of music and had quite a bit of money to drop on ivory bindings. And it's a little bit of a darker sound than the classical guitar of today, but very, very mellow. So much more of a society instrument. You have to, although this is quite a loud instrument for on its own right, it's not as loud as a concert classical guitar of today. So concerts were developed for this instrument in what they called salon concerts. So they were mid-sized rooms, kind of like the size of a classroom today, where you would have an artist playing an instrument, then you would have a poet. I noticed that you were talking about poetry. A poet would come out and recite a poem. You would have an artist present a painting and talk about it. And these were just the events of La Société, the society concerts. This instrument was made in the town of Méricourt in France, which is a town that is dedicated to making instruments, a lot of luthiers. And the reason I know that is because of this type of bridge. The ornament there is indicative of this town in France of this time period. So this is the romantic guitar or the parlor guitar.
A very rich tone.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine this over 200-year-old top. It had quite a bit of time to season itself. And as we develop the guitar, we also have this two sides of the instrument, right? Two sides of a mountain. The classical guitar develops around this time. I mean, for all accounts and purposes, this is the instrument that we have of great musicians such as Dionisio Aguado, Fernando Sor, who played on instruments during that time period, And every time I play on this guitar, repertoire written by them who were alive in that as this guitar was being played by then, I keep on imagining what if Aguado touched this guitar. And a friend of mine said, "Do not even give yourself that kind of mind trip, David." But it's remarkable, to have an antique like that. And so at the same time that we have this instrument, we have the development of a different type of instrument. This is a traditional flamenco guitar, right? The sides and back are made out of cypress. And this is a type of wood that is hard, not as hard as the rosewood that you would get in a classical guitar, right? So this is a classical. Right? And so the classical over here is thicker, right, as compared to this one, right? So if I were to just do, I don't know, this, you would notice how much thicker the classical would be. I don't know how to put them together. Don't want to damage my instruments. But the flamenco has a narrower body, and the cypress wood will actually give it a type of punchy sound that would really cut through. And you need that when you're playing with flamenco dancers, because things can get pretty loud in a flamenco tablao. The action, how high the strings are from the top of the guitar, is also pretty low in a flamenca, so that you can actually get through scales and go through chord progressions a lot easier. You can also tell that this traditional type of pegs is still in use, sometimes even in classical guitars. So they haven't died out. These are friction pegs. So you basically, in many ways, have to turn it and jam it in there so it stays in tune. Nowadays, we have these tuning machines that make life so much better. In fact, I'm just going to admit to it. I am cheating here. These are geared pegs. I did not want to damage the finish of this, but I replaced the traditional pegs. So these are not friction anymore. They have gears inside of them so that I can turn it, and when I release it, it doesn't go out of tune. So yeah, I cheated a little bit. But I make up for it by tuning lutes and vihuelas and all of these instruments that have friction pegs. So that's my excuse. So a flamenco guitar, a lot of strumming, but also a lot of solo playing, right? Right. Also, gracias. On flamenco guitar, you'll notice that we have this piece of plastic that is a tap plate, so you can actually make percussive sounds. So when you're working with dancers, you're strumming, and sometimes you really have to be heard, because when they really are stomping on the floor, I mean, everything starts shaking. I mean, it's like your own personal earthquake when you're working with flamenco dancers. Right. So I also have a bit of tap plate over here, and that's the knuckle hitting the guitar here. And then you continue out there, and it's just a technique that when we're giving the accents to the dancer needs to hear this. But if she or he gets excited and they're really going at it, you're not going to hear any of the strumming. It doesn't matter how loud I go, but they'll hear that. And so having that tap plate, it's really an indispensable feature of the flamenco guitar, so that the ensemble can be together. In many ways, the guitar is kind of the glue that keeps the flamenco ensemble together. We're giving everybody their accompaniment, the singer, the dancer, the percussionist also helps out a lot in that, if you are lucky enough to have a percussionist. So that's the flamenco guitar. And then we move on to the classical guitar. And this is a modern concert classical guitar. This is my favorite guitar. It's made by Daniel Ferrudi. It's made in France. And it's got a very sweet sound, reason why I call it Sweetie, right?
Beautiful. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.
My pleasure. So that's a few centuries of guitar, its development, its history. Now, of course, we didn't get into the lives and doings of many of the composers, but I really hope that this pandemic is over soon and we can go back to having our events, and maybe I can play face to face with you. And if not, we'll just hold virtual events. I'm ready for that too.
So, yes, I hope so too. We haven't mentioned it here yet, but we did have you over at the gallery last year for a flamenco, for a wonderful show that you put together.
Thank you.
You've done some nice events in this area. We didn't talk about it yet, but maybe we have a few minutes now.
Mhm.
Tell us about this extravaganza you put on every year with guitars. You invite people from all over the world. It's
Correct. Yeah.
special event.
Yeah, it started as a pedagogical tool. To really be honest, I enjoy teaching, and I have like I said, a large studio of students at CSU Stanislaus, and they're all wonderful. And there are things that I tell them, and some of them are watching. And as I tell them and repeat it over and over and over again, I notice that it is not until they play that piece for somebody else and that other person says, "Have you thought of doing this?" And then they come to my next lesson. "Hey, David, he just told me to do this with my right hand, and it sounds so much better." And I'm thinking, "Yeah, go figure, right?" And I have not been telling you this for the last 2 years, but it's when somebody else tells you. So I just figured if we bring artists on an ongoing basis every semester, students get exposed to different points of view from music, not just what they're told. But it started as that, and then I just thought, well, we're doing so many different things because of my musical inclinations. I know lute players, I know flamenco players, I know classical players. So I tend to invite all of my musician friends to do concerts. And through my studies in Europe and the US, and Latin America, I've been fortunate enough to develop with amazing peers. And so I have an amazing Rolodex of people that I can invite on an ongoing basis. So I started the Guitarraganza Festival a long time ago. Has it been about 2012? I think was the first one. And so we just celebrated it right before going on pandemic. We had it for the last time, and then we just had to shut everything down. So it happens on the last week of February every year. And this time around, this coming February, we're going to be online virtually, but I am still going to bring in artists to perform for our students. So Guitarraganza is alive. And how do you get there? It's guitarraganza.com. Just think of the word guitar. In Spanish is guitarra. It's the two R's. And Ganza, Ganza. And it's basically a take on the word, as you said, David, extravaganza. So it's a guitar extravaganza, and we just call it Guitarraganza. So we have flamenco, we have early music, and we have workshops for students, not only for guitar players, but people who love the guitar. And at the order of the day, we have incredible concerts. I've been able to bring people from Germany, the UK recently, Argentina, Mexico, Cuba, all over the US, definitely. So the list goes on, and I'm just looking forward to continuing and doing this. So last 2 weeks of February, check us out at Stan State.
Yeah, this started when you were at MJC, correct? How many years have you been doing this?
I started doing the Guitarraganza. The festival itself started in 2012. I came to the Valley in 2001. I was hired as the director of guitar studies at MJC. Did 18 years there, and then I did the move to Stan State. So yeah, I mean, it just basically has continued, gotten larger, better, more powerful, and the more we do, the more following we have, and the more audience members we can reach.
Earlier, David, you were talking about Black Musicians Matter. Could you explain what
Yeah.
that is?
So as I was getting ready for this semester, for the guest artist of this semester, we booked this a year in advance. So you could imagine what happened when the pandemic struck, right? We had already agreed with an amazing lute player from well, actually he was born in New York, Andrew McGinley, and he went to Germany on the same year that I did. So I went to study guitar and lute, and he went to study lute. And Andrew is an incredible lute player and a great friend. We just became best of friends when we were studying over there. And he resides now in the UK. And so I just convinced him to play a concert for us and come over to California and do a workshop and work with our students. Teach everybody about the lute and play a great concert. And then the pandemic struck. And he told me, I don't know that I can leave the UK. I don't know if I can do that. And I said, well, we might have to cancel. And then I spoke to my dean and I said, well, what if we have a virtual concert, a virtual event for all the students? And he said, yeah, we should do it. And so Dr. Twilio gave me the green light. I spoke to Andrew, and that he was very excited. And so we moved forward. And then the atrocities that were committed against our African American sisters and brothers in particular started happening, with so many killings, and so many people coming out in protest of this, just having their voices heard. I just thought, well, how can we do something, put our little grain of sand there? And now Andrew, the lute player, is African American. And I asked him, well, we got you engaged to play a concert and give a workshop. Would you mind, on top of that, to be our first artist in a series that I hope is going to take off? And that series is going to be called Black Musicians Matter. And it's not in any means, in any way, an attempt to take importance away from Black Lives Matter, which is extremely important and very close to my heart. Not at all. It's our little grain of sand to help and do our part. And so bringing attention to the fact that we have amazing musicians. And Andy got so excited about that. He said, yeah, let's do this. And this very last week, he gave an incredible talk to everybody. And we have that available at the university, live stream events for free. Anybody can go in and watch that conversation with the students about lute playing continuo, the concert that he gave, and also the social rights talk that he gave. So we're living in a very interesting time. So if we found ourselves in a time of civil rights upheaval and change in the 1960s, I think that we are looking at a second wave now. And I'm hoping that we're going to be very successful in having people heard. Because if you think of it this way, African American musicians, in one way, shape, or form, have been persecuted, not enabled. If we start enabling these people to write their music, to perform, could you imagine how far we would be in the arts? Instead of, rather than oppressing people, we would enable these people. We will have so many amazing things. I mean, they gave us jazz, they gave us rap, hip hop. There are so many great art forms that come out of the African American contingency in this country. We should celebrate it, not restrain them. And this is a little bit of help in that regard. So I'm hoping that every semester we have at least one Black Musicians Matter artist come in, perform for us, give a talk to our students, and give an inspirational talk to our campus and our community at large.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful,
Yes.
educational, entertaining. Thank you so much for being here. I hate to bring it from this high level of culture down to the way we usually end the program, but Linda, take over.
Okay. We're going to ask 10 questions. If you can answer them quickly, great.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I'm going to change one up, David. So if you could snap your fingers and be anywhere in space and time, where would you go?
I would like to be in Siena, Italy in the late 1990s. Yes, around the year 2000.
So, if you weren't a musician, what would you be instead?
You are never going to believe this, but I love bones. I actually was doing pre-med when I was in high school. And I think that bones are the most amazing part of our bodies. If they break, they actually immediately start throwing tendrils out to reconnect themselves.
Huh.
So I'm fascinated by that. So medicine, yeah, I would probably be a physician.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your favorite animal and why?
I would say dogs. I think that they are very loyal, and there is something about a great pet, a great dog that makes you feel happy to be there with them. They just love being around you, and they really show it.
So, you make so many beautiful sounds. What sound do you like the least?
I hope nobody hates me for saying this, but the sound that comes out of a loud motorcycle, I hate that. It's so disturbing. It's so unmusical.
Yeah, like leaf blowers. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and there's a lot of people love Harley Davidson. They're great for them, but you know, when somebody does this and you're trying to play music or you're trying to work with somebody or you're trying to have a moment of peace, but you know, we live in a society and we have to accept.
What is your go-to food?
Oh boy. You know, one thing about having studied and traveled through the world is that it gives you so much opportunity. Unfortunately, you know, I'm trying to lose weight to try great food. My go-to food, I would say sushi, Japanese, but I am very partial to Italian and of course paella in Spain.
So, if we have souls, what color is yours?
If we have souls, I would say in between pink and light blue.
Okay. Interesting one.
What do you frequently dream about?
My students.
Ah.
Yeah. I in the back of my mind, I have their careers and at heart, and I'm thinking of what the next step for them is. I'm really worried, you know, about their steps, the things that they do, and the people that they meet. You know, if one of my guys or girl in the studio meets the wrong person, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, all of that work that we did together. Oh no.
Okay. So, to end it up, what's it going to say on your tombstone?
He helped inspire many.
Ah,
Okay.
I hope so.
lovely.
Thank you.
How true.
Well, thank you for indulging this bit of foolishness at the end. It's been a wonderful time with you today. We've learned a lot. It's just very special.
It was
So
nice.
until we can get together in person and plan some more events.
Let's do it. Sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. It was just marvelous.
Thank you. Cheers.
So, as a way of saying goodbye, we want to invite you here next week because we started out this show talking about poetry. And Linda, and I participating in something called Collision. And I told you about how the Collision show started with Sam Piersdorf. He's going to be here next week.
Oh, good.
So we'll do a lot about poetry and maybe shove in a few photographs. So tune in. Thanks. See you then. Bye-bye.